Man, the playoffs, the NFL playoffs are here. Even though the Minnesota Vikings, they don't have to worry about playing in an actual playoff game for about a week and a half from now. This is Realistic Randy of the Mediokr at Best Sports Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And the Vikings, they clinched the number 2 seed after finishing 13-3 on the season. They'll get the first round bye heading into the playoffs after beating the Chicago Bears 23-10 in the season finale, week 17 against the Chicago Bears. And I got a couple of comments on Facebook from Vikings fans expressing concern over the offense of the Vikings, particularly over the last couple of weeks. So, again, the Chicago Bears, you beat them 23-10. And the week prior to that, at Lambeau Field against the Green Bay Packers, you put up 16 points in a shutout. So, here's the thing. I'm not going to rag on the offense, okay? I'm just not, for a couple of reasons. Against the Green Bay Packers, you played in frigid, freezing cold temperatures, all right? You'll take that win however it is you can get it and just move the hell on. And then when it comes to the Chicago Bears, look, after possession after possession after possession on offense, the Chicago Bears showed you that they had nothing. And outside of a trick punt return and a field goal, the Chicago Bears, they showed you absolutely nothing. So my thing is, my theory with that game is, right or wrong, after you see that the offense of the Chicago Bears had absolutely nothing to show, right or wrong, the natural reaction of not necessarily complacency, but just knowing, feeling confident, like, oh, we got this. We got this. We're going to kick this team's ass. In fact, why get cute and throw deep balls and to do all this other stuff? And I know that's what we want to see compared to the rest of this season. That's what they've been doing. But the last couple of weeks, they haven't been doing that really. Against that Chicago Bears team, you're week 17. You already lost Nick Easton. You lost Dalvin Cook. You lost Sam Bradford for the year. Why try to get cute and risk injury? You know you're going to play. You know you're going to beat this team. I don't mind the fact that they went super conservative against the Chicago Bears. All right, I'm just not. And against the Green Bay Packers, you were in freezing cold temperatures. So against going into the playoffs, you're going to be playing in, assuming that the Eagles go down, you're going to be playing in a lot better elements because you're assuming that the Eagles do go down. The playoffs will go through Minnesota at US Bank Stadium. Then not only that, but the quality of opponents are going to go up in the playoffs, and I expect the offense to be ready for that. My actual concern for this team has been the last month or so. They haven't faced a quality opponent, certainly one that's not playoff worthy. The last playoff opponent that they faced in the regular season was the Carolina Panthers. And I think the Carolina Panthers, they did a good job taking advantage of the defensive mishaps at Bank of America Stadium when they played the Vikings. I still think they're absolute NFC contender frauds, even though they made me look silly when I said that the Vikings would beat them by double digits. But that's neither here nor there. But I expect this offense to be ready to go. Moving forward, we'll talk about the NFC playoff picture, ideal situations, who it is you want to see if you're a Vikings fan, and give the easiest chance to success of going to the Super Bowl compared to what may actually happen realistically. So we'll talk about that real quick, though, before we get into that. I want to give a shout-out to a couple of players and then talk about a potential roster move heading into the playoffs, and then the offensive and defensive coordinator positions that may be vacant for the Vikings heading into next season. But real quick, Latavius Murray, I want to give this dude a shout out. I don't think he's got enough credit. Latavius Murray with the Oakland Raiders, he averaged 4 yards per carry. And you know what? The offensive line with the Oakland Raiders was one of the best offensive lines in all of football. I wasn't really expecting Dalvin Cook. I really wasn't expecting much from Latavius Murray as far as outside of being his usual underwhelming self like he was in Oakland. But he's had a lot of impact in these games, man. He's done a very good job along with Jerick McKinnon. And I don't really bring up Jerick McKinnon. I've given him enough praise. And quite honestly, I'm not surprised by anything that Jerick McKinnon is doing this year. Last year, he had a down year, but the offensive line was terrible. He's not a big running back. He's not the biggest running back in the world. He's a shifty running back who requires space to make moves in the backfield before moving forward. That's just who he is. So if you don't have an offensive line, by process of elimination, Jerick McKinnon is going to have a bad year. But anyway, the Vikings offensive line, they've done a good job, but Latavius Murray has done a very good job having just as much of an impact on the running game as much as Jerick McKinnon. So much so that before each Vikings game over the last 5 or 6 weeks, and I mean this in no disrespect whatsoever, but over the last 5 or 6 weeks, I have to be reminded during the broadcast of every Vikings game that Dalvin Cook is still a member of the Minnesota Vikings. It's to the point now where every week I'm just going, oh, yeah, that's right. Like the announcer says, hey, you forget Dalvin Cook. He went down for the year earlier this year. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. That did happen. He is a member of the Minnesota Vikings. That's how great of an impact that Latavius Murray has had. So shout out to him for doing a good job. I thought Jarrett McKinnon would actually be the featured running back after Dalvin Cook went down, just because Latavius Murray for most of his career has been underwhelming. But worst case, if he's not with the team next year, he's at least showcasing his talents to the other 31 teams. Look, I'm still capable of being a number one running back. So good job to him. And then not only that, this was brought up by Damon and Nick in the comment section on the last podcast on YouTube, as far as a guy that does deserve some shout out and does deserve some praise. And he had a very good game against Chicago as well. That's Trey Waynes. Trey Waynes has had a very underrated season. He's done a hell of a job. And here's the thing. The only problem I've ever had with Trey Waynes is the fact that, look, the talent is there. There's no question about that. The dude can keep up with anybody. He's a surefire tackler. He's gritty. He's tough. He can make plays on the ball. He's got good vertical leap. He's tall enough to hang with the bigger cornerbacks along with Xavier Rhodes. He's a little bit lanky. He could, put on a little bit weight, but who cares? The talent was always there. That was never the question with Trey Waynes. The only issue that I've ever had with Trey Waynes was his tendency to grab and hold despite almost always seemingly being in position to make a play on the ball. The dude can keep up with anybody, but it seemed like whenever he was targeted on whatever receiver he was covering, especially last year, the automatic tendency of, even if he's in position to make a play on the ball, he'd go, it's almost like a panic mode, so to say. He'd go, oh, well, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to hold. It seemed like he was like panicking a little bit, not knowing what to do. But he's dialed that down a lot more this year. And I was saying to myself, I was like, man, I feel like I haven't heard that many penalties for Trey Waynes this year, especially compared to last year. And it was like, seemingly every game, or at least every other game. And I wanted to look this up. So I found this according to NFLpenalties.com. I tried to Google as far as, penalties among Trey Waynes, and this is the first website that came up. But NFLpenalties.com. So this year, Trey Waynes has 4 penalties called on him this year. He had back-to-back penalties weeks 1 against the New Orleans Saints at US Bank Stadium, and he also had it in week 2 at Heinz Field against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then he had his 3rd penalty called at Chicago October 9th, so that was about 3 weeks later. And then about a month and a half later against Detroit in that Thanksgiving game, he got his last penalty called for the regular season. He hasn't been called for a penalty, according to NFLpenalties.com. He hasn't been called for a penalty for the last month and a half or so. That's outstanding compared to last year. So he had 4 this year compared to last year. Trey Waynes last year had 7 penalties called on him. So every other game, seemingly, he had a penalty called on him. That's an outstanding job. He's cut his penalties by damn near half. So good job to him. And you know what? The law of averages, Trey Waynes was going to face the bulk of the targets because quarterbacks are avoiding Xavier Rhodes. So to not only be able to face the bulk of the targets as the cornerbacks of the Vikings are concerned, because of course quarterbacks are avoiding Xavier Rhodes, to be able to face those targets and still hold your own and not be in a disaster. Because my thing was, well, if he's going to get most of the targets and with his tendency to hold, this could be a disaster. He's had a very, very great season, a very underrated season. I don't think he gets enough credit. And then moving forward from that, a potential roster move in these playoffs. Sam Bradford is back to practicing. And quite honestly, I think that's a very good thing. I like him as an insurance policy to Case Keenum. And quite honestly, if you're asking me between Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater, who would you rather have as the backup to Case Keenum? Because let's not get it twisted, Case Keenum is the starting quarterback, okay? But if you're asking me who between Sam and Teddy, who would I want as a backup quarterback, it's Sam Bradford. In fact, if all 3 quarterbacks are healthy, Sam Bradford is the best quarterback. And then I like Teddy Bridgewater, and we'll talk about the quarterback situation heading into next season because we don't have a quarterback on this roster as of right now heading into next season. But Teddy has missed basically 2 years of football, and compared to Sam Bradford, he's played a game and a half this year, so he's missed 14 and a half games if you want to count that half he played in Chicago, which you can count that or not. It doesn't really matter to me. but he's missed less time than Teddy Bridgewater, and he knows this offense with Pat Shurmur like the back of his hand. So that's why I like the insurance policy with Sam Bradford in case Case Keenum struggles or if he goes down for whatever reason. Then not only that, potential coaching changes as far as the coordinators for the Vikings heading into next year. George Edwards and Pat Shurmur will be interviewing for head coaching positions this offseason. Pat Shurmur in particular, he's going, well, not this offseason. Pat Shurmur is going to be interviewing with 4 teams this week during this bye week. So this really shouldn't be a shock to anybody. We've already known this was going to be coming. I said the last podcast, combat that by offering whatever it takes, head coaching money to keep Pat Shurmur to where if he still decides I want to be a head coach somewhere else, then you did all that you could. Hopefully they have a backup plan. Ideally, you want Pat Shurmur to stay. I mean, you compare this offense compared to last year when it was mainly Norv Turner calling the shots for the half of the season before he walked away, compared to this year where Pat Shurmur is the full-time offensive coordinator. Compared this season to last year on offense, it's like night and day. So anyway, you shouldn't be shocked by this, but hopefully they have a pool of candidates that they'll want to look at if Pat Shurmur decides that he wants to leave. One thing we know about Mike Zimmer, he is a very, very selfless person. He is not one to get all big and bad and say, I can do everything. He relays all the offense to a much more knowledgeable offensive coordinator. It's like ever since Mike Zimmer's got here, whether it was with Norv Turner before and Pat Shurmur right now, it's almost like we have a two-headed monster at the head coaching front for the Vikings. And I love it. I love that Mike Zimmer will relay the offense to someone that's more knowledgeable than him on offense. Obviously, he's the defensive guy. So, anyway, we'll have to see how this goes. Obviously, the playoffs are the focal point for this Vikings team. But it'll be interesting to see what will happen with the quarterback spot next season, along with the coordinators, both coordinator spots for this Vikings team. But anyway, NFC playoff picture. As far as ideal situations, who you want to face if you're a Vikings fan, who would you rather see your team face if you're a Vikings fan? And then not only that, but what will probably happen realistically. We'll break down these games real quick.
I'm Jay.
And I'm Matt of the hashtag NFZ, a.k.a. No Fly Zone, now officially part of the BGC Sports Network.
You can also find the show on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/spell it out, hashtag NFZ, and the Apple Podcast app.
Now, let's kick it back over to Realistic Randy and the Mediocre at Best Sports Podcast.
Let's get this out the way real quick. I said that Nick Foles, he did a good job. In my opinion, he did. I know my brother-in-law would disagree with me till, to the bitter end. But anyway, I think Nick Foles did a good job in his first stint with the Eagles for what he had to deal with, coaching changes and all that other stuff. Then not only that, you bring on Doug Peterson. You've got an offense with Carson Wentz who was doing well, so you're asking him to fill in. I thought Nick Foles would have done a pretty decent job, or if not a pretty good job. He's been maybe okay, but not really. The last couple of weeks, the Eagles have been a complete disaster. They nearly lost to the New York Giants. That game, the next game against the Oakland Raiders, was one of the worst football games I ever saw in my life. That was a disgusting game. The Raiders did all they could the Eagles did all they could to give the Raiders to win. They said, nah, it was like hot potato. You take it, you take it, you take it. No, you take it. So anyway, and then not only that, but they lost to the Cowboys 6-0 in their season finale. I think they're going to be one and done. I think in that bracket, when you got obviously they got the bye week, so who knows? We'll have to see how they do. They'll be playing at their home field, so that gives them a little bit of an advantage. But if you're talking about the fact that they're likely going to face the Panthers or the Saints, I think no matter which team they face, they're going to lose that game. Now, here's the thing. As far as the 6 versus the 3 seeds, so the Falcons are going to go to LA to face the Rams. And I know the Rams have been red hot, and if you're asking me if I was a betting man, which I kind of am, I would not bet on this game, but if I was forced to make a pick, I would pick the Rams. They're a much more talented team. They've had the much better season. But I wonder, I can't help but wonder if the Rams if they're one of those teams where they just had a super hot year, came out of nowhere, then they get in the playoffs, because you got to remember, the postseason is different now. Everybody has a clean slate record, 0-0, 0-0, right? So I can't help but wonder if this is a Rams team that had too much of a hot start, too much of a hot year, then they get in the playoffs and it's like, whoa, kind of feeling themselves a little bit. I can't help but wonder. I wouldn't be shocked if the Falcons upset the Rams. I'm not going to pick in that game, but I would not be shocked if the Falcons upset the Rams. You're talking about a first-year head coach, Sean McVay, who, in my opinion, and I know Mike Zimmer deserves some credit too, I believe Sean McVay is probably the front runner for head coach of the year. And then not only that, Jared Goff, this is his first time in the playoffs in his second year in the league. And Todd Gurley, he should probably be the MVP in my humble opinion. But I can't help but wonder if this may be too much for this young team, if they're just a year away from getting into what they'll really shape up to be. So we'll have to pay attention to that. And then not only that, but this Panthers-Saints game. So the Saints actually swept the Panthers in both games this season in the NFC South. I wouldn't be shocked. Actually, you know what? I would be shocked if the Panthers beat the New Orleans Saints. Like I said, the Panthers, they did a good job against the Vikings. I predicted that the Vikings would beat them by double digits. They proved me wrong, but I'm sorry. Cam Newton is still overrated to me. I believe if it wasn't for that defense, and look, Cam Newton is very talented. His talent alone, if your defense is caught slipping, he'll make you pay based on his read option abilities and able to scramble with the ball. And to be able to ad-lib a little bit. He can get outside the pocket, and he can throw to a wide-open guy. But if your defense is on point, and if you're forcing Cam Newton to have to play, catch-up, where it's like, all right, you need to score too. Now, the Carolina defense is very good. Maybe they'll have something to say about that. But if the offense of the New Orleans Saints, with that two-headed monster they have at running backs, with, Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram, I think that's going to be a little too much. I think the Saints will easily win that game. And then basically what will happen is, if the Falcons win, they'll face the Eagles at Lincoln Financial Field. And then whoever the winner is between the Panthers and the Saints, they'll face the Vikings. Quite honestly, out of the only team that I see as a threat, now I kind of see the Rams as a little bit of threat, but not really. Like I said, I can't help but think they're a little bit too young. I think they're a year away from what they'll really be. But the only team that I really fear out of this pool is the New Orleans Saints. You've got one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Great offense, that running game, they're versatile running back. They're like an amplified version, a much more amplified version of Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon, because Alvin Kamara is electric with the ball just like Jerick McKinnon is, and Mark Ingram is an all-around running back just like Latavius Murray is. Now, the difference is the talent gap, or not necessarily, maybe you can say talent gap. Obviously, they're much more productive than what Jerick McKinnon and Latavius Murray has been. So that running game that they got, I am a little bit concerned about it. Their defense is a lot much better than what they were in week one. That would be the only concern I have. But quite honestly, I'm looking at this and I think the Vikings have a shot. Like I said, they have a shot to go to the NFC. Well, not a shot. I believe they have the team and the coaching staff to make it to the NFC Championship game. They have what it takes to make it to the Super Bowl, but I just want to see how they do from there. But quite honestly, the only team I fear is the Saints. Who I would rather see is out of the rest of the teams. I mean, the Rams would be the other team where I have a little bit of hesitation on. But quite honestly, I have no problem if we face the Panthers again, especially at US Bank Stadium, or Nick Foles and the Eagles. Or it wouldn't be at US Bank Stadium, it'd be at Lincoln Financial Field. But I think they're going to be one and done. They've been awful. The playoffs are all about, not necessarily all about, but a big part of the playoffs is how do you finish the regular season? And yes, they went 2 out of their last 3, but the Philadelphia Eagles have been god-awful to finish this season. I think they'll be one and done. I would like to see the Panthers, quite honestly, in the NFC Championship game, but we'll just have to see. So anyway, up next, we're going to talk elsewhere in sports, everything that's going on. Carson Palmer retired. Marvin Lewis got an extension. Ted Thompson is stepping down, but they gave Mike McCarthy, head coach of the Packers, an extension. And then not only that, but Isaiah Thomas is back with the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll talk about that. Mediokr Best Sports Podcast with Realistic Randy.
All I need is